Marcus Thompson had promised his wife Sarah that their 15-year marriage was stronger than ever. But when she discovered him in their own bedroom with 19-year-old Emma, the neighbor's daughter who called her Auntie Sarah, those same hands that once held her wedding ring would soon be stained with blood. If you're fascinated by true crime stories that expose the darkest secrets hiding behind suburban facades, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We dive deep into cases that will leave you questioning everyone you think you know. But let's go back to where it all began. Willowbrook Drive had always been the kind of street where children rode bicycles until sunset and neighbors borrowed cups of sugar from each other. The Thompson house at number 47 sat like a picture-perfect postcard of American suburban life, with its manicured lawn, white picket fence, and the seasonal decorations that Sarah Thompson changed religiously every few months. For 15 years, Marcus and Sarah had been the golden couple of their quiet neighborhood, the ones other families looked up to as the example of what marriage should be. Marcus, a 43-year-old insurance executive with graying temples and laugh lines around his eyes, had built his reputation on reliability. His neighbors trusted him to watch their houses during vacations. His colleagues respected his steady judgment, and his wife Sarah had always believed she had married the most dependable man in the world. He left for work every morning at exactly 7:45 a.m. in his silver Honda Accord, kissed Sarah goodbye on the cheek, and returned home by 6:30 p.m. with stories about his day and genuine interest in hers. Sarah, a 41-year-old elementary school teacher with warm brown eyes and a smile that made every child in her third-grade classroom feel special, had spent their marriage creating the kind of home that felt like a sanctuary. She baked cookies for new neighbors, organized block parties, and had a gift for remembering everyone's birthday. The walls of their home were covered with photos chronicling their life together. Their wedding day, vacations to national parks, holidays with Sarah's parents, and countless dinner parties with friends who often commented on how lucky they were to have found each other. But by the spring of 2023, cracks had begun to appear in their perfect facade, though Sarah was the last to notice them. Marcus had been working longer hours, claiming that his company was expanding and needed his expertise to train new hires in their Denver branch. He would come home exhausted, barely touching the dinner Sarah had carefully prepared, and falling asleep in front of the television instead of joining her for their usual evening walks around the neighborhood. When Sarah tried to address the growing distance between them, Marcus would pull her close and reassure her with the same words he had used for months. "Sarah, honey, you know our marriage is stronger than ever. I'm just going through a stressful period at work. Once this expansion is finished, things will go back to normal." His voice carried such conviction that Sarah pushed down her instincts and chose to believe him, because believing him was easier than confronting the alternative. What Sarah didn't know was that Marcus had been living a double life for the past 8 months, and the center of that deception lived just 3 houses down at number 41. The Carter family had moved to Willowbrook Drive 2 years earlier. James Carter, a soft-spoken accountant, his wife Linda, a nurse at the local hospital, and their daughter Emma, who had just turned 19 and was taking a gap year before starting college. Emma had inherited her mother's striking blonde hair and her father's bright blue eyes, but there was something else about her that drew attention, a confidence that seemed unusual for her age, a way of moving through the world as if she already understood its secrets. From the moment the Carters had arrived on Willowbrook Drive, Emma had charmed every adult in the neighborhood. She helped elderly Mrs. Peterson with her groceries, babysat for the Johnsons when they needed a night out, and had even helped Sarah plant flowers in her front garden during their first spring as neighbors. "She's like the daughter I never had," Sarah had told Marcus one evening, watching Emma laugh with a group of neighborhood children from their living room window. Emma called Sarah Auntie Sarah, and Marcus Uncle Marcus, terms of endearment that made the childless couple feel like they had gained a niece. When Emma had trouble with her college applications, Sarah spent hours helping her with essays. When she needed someone to practice driving with, Marcus offered to take her to the empty parking lot of the high school. These innocent interactions had created a foundation of trust that would make the betrayal even more devastating when it was finally discovered. The affair had begun in September 2022, almost accidentally, during what should have been a routine driving lesson. Emma had been unusually quiet that afternoon, and when Marcus asked what was wrong, she broke down crying about her boyfriend who had cheated on her with another girl from their high school graduating class. Marcus had pulled the car over and offered her a tissue, telling her that any boy who would cheat on someone as wonderful as her wasn't worth her tears. "You really think I'm wonderful, Uncle Marcus?" Emma had asked, and something in her voice, vulnerable but also testing, had shifted the dynamic between them. Marcus would later claim that he had tried to keep things appropriate, but Emma had leaned closer, and when she kissed him softly on the cheek to thank him for being so kind, he hadn't pulled away. Over the following weeks, their interactions became charged with an energy that both excited and terrified Marcus. Emma would find excuses to visit when she knew Sarah was at work, bringing cookies she had baked or asking for help with college preparation tasks that could have waited. Marcus began looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that filled him with guilt, but he told himself that nothing was really happening, that they were just developing a closer friendship. The first real kiss happened in October, during a thunderstorm that had knocked out power to half the neighborhood. Emma had come over to check on them, and when Marcus opened the door, she was soaked from the rain, her blonde hair clinging to her face and her white shirt nearly transparent. Sarah was at a teacher's conference and wouldn't be home until late, and the house felt different in the darkness, more intimate and dangerous. "We shouldn't be doing this," Marcus whispered as Emma stepped into the darkened hallway, but his hands were already reaching for a towel to dry her hair. The storm outside had knocked out power to half of Willowbrook Drive, and the Thompson house felt like an island of secrecy in the darkness. Emma's blue eyes reflected the candlelight that Sarah had left burning in the kitchen before leaving for a conference, and when she looked up at Marcus, there was no trace of the innocent girl who had moved in 3 houses down. "Uncle Marcus," she said softly, and the familiar nickname now carried a different meaning entirely. "I've been thinking about what you said about that boy not deserving me. What kind of man would deserve me?" The question hung between them like a challenge, and Marcus felt 15 years of marriage vows crumbling under the weight of desire he had been fighting for weeks. What happened next would later be described by Marcus as a moment of weakness that destroyed everything, but security cameras from the Henderson house across the street would tell a different story. The footage, recovered months later during the police investigation, showed Emma leaving the Thompson house at 11:47 p.m., nearly 4 hours after she had arrived. Her clothes were different. She was wearing one of Sarah's sweaters, and her body language showed none of the urgency of someone who had simply been checking on neighbors during a power outage. The affair that began that stormy October night quickly evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple case of middle-aged infatuation. Emma proved to be nothing like the sweet, innocent teenager that everyone in the neighborhood believed her to be. She was calculating, manipulative, and possessed an understanding of male psychology that seemed far beyond her 19 years. Within weeks, she had transformed from the aggressor to the victim, crying to Marcus about how guilty she felt for betraying Auntie Sarah, while simultaneously sending him text messages that would later be described by prosecutors as sexually explicit and emotionally manipulative. Marcus found himself caught in a psychological trap that tightened with each encounter. Emma would alternate between passionate declarations of love and threats of suicide if he tried to end their relationship. "I can't live without you," she would whisper during their secret meetings in his garage workshop while Sarah was at school. "You're the only man who has ever really understood me." But then she would follow these moments of vulnerability with casual mentions of how easy it would be for the truth to accidentally come out during one of her visits with Sarah. The logistics of their affair required an elaborate system of deception that consumed Marcus's every waking moment. He created a fake email account using the name of a non-existent work colleague, purchased a second cell phone that he hid in his workshop, and began volunteering for weekend work assignments that didn't exist. Every lie required additional lies to support it, and Marcus found himself living in constant fear of making a mistake that would expose everything. Emma's behavior during this period revealed a sophisticated understanding of manipulation that disturbed even Marcus when he allowed himself to think about it clearly. She had studied Sarah's schedule meticulously, knowing exactly when the elementary school had faculty meetings, when Sarah volunteered at the local food bank, and when she visited her elderly parents in the neighboring town. Emma would time their encounters to coincide with these absences, but she was careful never to appear too eager or available, maintaining the pretense of a busy college-bound teenager with her own social life. More troubling was Emma's apparent enjoyment of the deception itself. She seemed to take particular pleasure in interacting normally with Sarah immediately after being intimate with Marcus, accepting Sarah's homemade cookies with a bright smile, and asking advice about college courses while the taste of her husband's kisses was still on her lips. "Auntie Sarah, you're so lucky to have Uncle Marcus," Emma would say, looking directly at Marcus while Sarah beamed with pride. "He's such a good man. You two have the perfect marriage." By December 2022, Marcus was experiencing what his therapist would later describe as cognitive dissonance, so severe it was affecting his ability to function normally. He was sleeping poorly, losing weight, and making mistakes at work that his colleagues attributed to stress from the company expansion. His relationship with Sarah became increasingly strained as he struggled to maintain normal intimacy with his wife while carrying on his affair with Emma. Sarah began suggesting marriage counseling, concerned about what she perceived as Marcus's growing depression and emotional distance. "Maybe we should plan a vacation," Sarah suggested one evening in early January, finding Marcus staring blankly at the television screen. "Just the two of us, somewhere warm. We could go to that resort in Mexico we've been talking about for years." Marcus's response, that work was too busy for him to take time off, was the same excuse he had been using for months, but this time Sarah's expression showed hurt rather than understanding. Emma, meanwhile, was escalating her demands on Marcus's time and attention. What had begun as occasional secret meetings had evolved into daily contact, with Emma expecting Marcus to be available whenever she texted or called. She had begun talking about their future together, making comments about Sarah that revealed a disturbing level of resentment toward the woman who had shown her nothing but kindness. "She's so boring," Emma complained during one of their January encounters in Marcus's workshop. "All she talks about is her students and her garden. How can you stand being married to someone so predictable?" When Marcus defended Sarah, Emma would pout and accuse him of not really loving her, threatening to reveal their relationship unless he proved his commitment by spending more time with her, and less time pretending to be happy with his wife. The turning point came on Valentine's Day, 2023, when Emma's behavior crossed a line that shocked even Marcus. Sarah had planned a romantic dinner at home, complete with candles, wine, and Marcus's favorite meal prepared from scratch. She had spent hours getting ready, wearing the red dress Marcus had bought her for Christmas, and styling her hair the way he used to say he loved. As they sat down to dinner, Sarah raised her wine glass and said, "To 15 years of marriage and many more to come." At that exact moment, Marcus's secret phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. "Happy Valentine's Day, darling. I'm wearing the lingerie you bought me. Can't wait until Sarah goes to sleep so you can come see it." The message was accompanied by a photo that made Marcus choke on his wine and excuse himself to the bathroom, where he stared at his reflection in the mirror and realized that he no longer recognized the man looking back at him. But Emma wasn't finished with her Valentine's Day surprise. At 9:30 p.m., just as Marcus and Sarah were settling in to watch a movie together, there was a knock at the front door. Sarah opened it to find Emma standing on their doorstep, holding a plate of heart-shaped cookies and wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I made these for you and Uncle Marcus," Emma said sweetly, stepping into the house without invitation. "I wanted to thank you both for being like family to me." She spent the next hour sitting in their living room, chatting with Sarah about college plans while making eye contact with Marcus in ways that made him increasingly uncomfortable. When she finally left, she hugged them both goodbye, but her embrace with Marcus lasted several seconds longer than appropriate, and she whispered so quietly that only he could hear, "I love you too, Marcus." Sarah noticed the extended hug and Marcus's obvious discomfort, but she attributed it to Emma's sometimes boundary-crossing affection. "She's such a sweet girl," Sarah said as they watched Emma walk back to her house. "But sometimes I think she might have a little crush on you. It's perfectly normal. Girls her age often develop feelings for older men who are kind to them." Marcus's response, that Sarah was imagining things, would be the last lie he would tell her before everything unraveled completely. March 2023 brought an unseasonably warm spring to Willowbrook Drive, and with it came a recklessness in Emma's behavior that would ultimately destroy the careful web of deception she and Marcus had constructed over the past 6 months. The affair that had begun with stolen moments and whispered conversations had evolved into something far more dangerous, a psychological game that Emma was determined to win, regardless of the consequences. The first sign that Emma was losing control came during the neighborhood's annual spring block party, held in the community park at the end of Willowbrook Drive. Sarah had spent weeks organizing the event, coordinating with other neighbors to arrange food, games, and entertainment for the children. She was in her element, moving from family to family with her warm smile and genuine interest in everyone's lives, the picture of a woman who had found her purpose in creating community. Marcus watched his wife with a mixture of admiration and crushing guilt as she helped elderly Mr. Peterson set up his folding chair and made sure the Johnson children had enough snacks. This was the Sarah he had fallen in love with 15 years ago. Kind, generous, completely unaware that her husband was betraying her with a girl she had welcomed into their lives like a daughter. Emma arrived at the block party wearing a sundress that was far too revealing for a neighborhood family event, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that caught the afternoon sunlight. She made a beeline for Marcus and Sarah, carrying a covered dish that she claimed was her famous potato salad, though several neighbors would later comment that it tasted exactly like the brand sold at the local grocery store. "Auntie Sarah, this party is amazing," Emma gushed, hugging Sarah with theatrical enthusiasm. "You're so talented at bringing people together. Uncle Marcus is so lucky to have a wife who makes everyone feel like family." The words were perfectly chosen to make Sarah beam with pleasure, but the way Emma's hand lingered on Marcus's arm as she spoke sent a clear message about who really held his attention. Throughout the afternoon, Emma engaged in increasingly bold behavior that only Marcus seemed to notice. She would brush against him when reaching for napkins, make comments loaded with double meaning about how close their families had become, and position herself so that Marcus couldn't avoid looking at her while trying to maintain normal conversations with neighbors. When Sarah organized games for the children, Emma volunteered to help, but spent most of her time finding excuses to bend over near where Marcus was sitting, creating a display that made him increasingly uncomfortable. The breaking point came during the cleanup, when most of the families had gone home, and only a few neighbors remained to fold tables and collect leftover food. Sarah was inside the community center washing dishes, and Marcus was alone in the park gathering trash, when Emma approached him with a boldness that shocked him even after months of her manipulative behavior. "I'm tired of sneaking around," she announced, pressing her body against his while pretending to help collect paper plates. "I want people to know that we're together. Sarah's a nice lady, but she doesn't make you happy the way I do." Her hand moved to his chest, and Marcus realized that anyone looking out the community center windows could see them. "Emma, stop," Marcus whispered, grabbing her wrist and pulling her hand away. "Someone will see us. Sarah is right inside." But Emma only smiled, expression that combined innocence with something much darker. "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing," she said softly. "Maybe it's time for everyone to know the truth about us." Before Marcus could respond, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him full on the lips, just as Sarah appeared in the doorway of the community center with a garbage bag in her hands. Time seemed to freeze as Sarah stared at her husband and the girl she had treated like a niece, their bodies pressed together in an embrace that could not be explained away as innocent affection. The garbage bag fell from Sarah's hands, scattering empty cups and napkins across the ground, but she didn't seem to notice. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, devastation, and finally, a cold fury that Marcus had never seen before. Emma, far from showing embarrassment or remorse, actually smiled at Sarah with her expression of triumph. "Hi, Auntie Sarah," she said cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. "We were just cleaning up. Marcus was helping me reach something high." The lie was so obvious and insulting that it somehow made the betrayal even worse. Sarah said nothing. She turned and walked back into the community center, leaving Marcus and Emma standing in the park surrounded by scattered trash and the ruins of 15 years of marriage. Marcus felt his world collapsing around him as he realized that the careful deception he had maintained for months had been destroyed in a single moment of Emma's reckless arrogance. "Sarah, wait," Marcus called, running after his wife, but she had already reached her car and was fumbling with her keys. Her hand was shaking so badly that she dropped them twice before managing to unlock the door. When Marcus reached her, she turned to face him with tears streaming down her cheeks. "How long?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been with her?" Marcus opened his mouth to lie, to minimize, to somehow make this betrayal seem less devastating than it was, but the look in Sarah's eyes stopped him. She already knew enough to destroy him. There was no point in adding more deception to the pile. 6 months, he admitted, and watched as his wife's face crumpled with the weight of understanding how completely she had been deceived. Sarah got into her car without another word and drove away, leaving Marcus standing in the empty parking lot with the sound of Emma's laughter echoing behind him. That night, Sarah didn't come home. Marcus called her cell phone repeatedly, but she didn't answer. He drove to her sister's house, to the school where she worked, to every place he could think she might go, but Sarah had disappeared completely. When he finally returned to their house at midnight, he found Emma sitting on his front porch steps, wearing a short robe and a smile that made his blood run cold. "Isn't this exciting?" she said, standing up and walking toward him. "Now we don't have to hide anymore. We can finally be together the way we were meant to be." Marcus stared at this young woman who had just destroyed his marriage and seemed to be celebrating the devastation she had caused. For the first time since their affair began, Marcus saw Emma clearly. Not as the innocent girl who called him Uncle Marcus, not as the vulnerable teenager who needed his protection, but as the calculating manipulator who had orchestrated this entire situation for her own twisted satisfaction. And in that moment of clarity, Marcus Thompson made the decision that would turn him from an unfaithful husband into a murderer. Sarah didn't return home that night, or the next, leaving Marcus alone with the suffocating reality of what his life had become. Emma, meanwhile, seemed to view Sarah's absence as an invitation rather than a tragedy, appearing at the Thompson house multiple times each day with barely concealed excitement about their newfound freedom. What Marcus had expected to feel like liberation instead felt like a psychological prison, with Emma as both his jailer and the key to his destruction. "We can finally be a real couple now," Emma announced on the second morning, letting herself into the house with the spare key she had somehow acquired. She was carrying overnight bags and wearing one of Sarah's aprons over her clothes, a detail so disturbing that Marcus felt physically sick. "I've been thinking about how we should redecorate this place. Sarah's taste is so boring and old-fashioned." Marcus stared at this 19-year-old girl who was casually discussing erasing his wife from their shared home as if Sarah were nothing more than an inconvenient tenant who had finally been evicted. "Emma, this isn't what I wanted," he said quietly. "Sarah is my wife. We need to talk about fixing this, not redecorating." Emma's expression shifted from excited to dangerous in an instant. "Fix this," she repeated, her voice taking on a tone Marcus had never heard before. "There's nothing to fix, Marcus. Sarah knows the truth now, and she's gone. This is what was supposed to happen. This is what you wanted when you started touching me." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow, partly because of its cruelty and partly because it contained enough truth to destroy him. He had wanted Emma, had pursued her even while knowing it would devastate Sarah, and now he was facing the consequences of choices he had convinced himself were temporary lapses in judgment. Over the following days, Emma's behavior became increasingly erratic and possessive. She moved her belongings into Marcus and Sarah's bedroom without permission, threw away Sarah's toiletries and personal items, and began answering the house phone when concerned neighbors called asking about Sarah's whereabouts. "She's taking some time to think," Emma would tell them cheerfully. "Marcus and I are taking care of everything." The neighbors' reactions to Emma's obvious presence in the Thompson household ranged from confusion to outright hostility. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman next door who had known Marcus and Sarah for years, confronted Marcus directly when she saw Emma retrieving mail from their mailbox. "That girl has no business acting like she lives in your house," Mrs. Peterson said bluntly. "Where is Sarah? What have you done?" Her questions carried an accusation that made Marcus realize how his situation appeared to the outside world, a middle-aged man whose wife had mysteriously disappeared, replaced by a teenager young enough to be his daughter. Emma seemed to revel in the neighbors' disapproval, making increasingly bold displays of her relationship with Marcus. She would kiss him goodbye on the front porch when he left for work, wave from the bedroom window while wearing Sarah's robe, and make sure to be visible whenever neighbors were outside. It was as if she wanted the entire street to know that she had successfully stolen another woman's husband and home. The breaking point came on the 5th night of Sarah's absence, when Marcus finally received the phone call he had been dreading. Sarah's voice was hollow and broken when she spoke, barely recognizable as the warm, confident woman he had married. "I'm staying at my sister's house," Sarah said without preamble. I need you to pack my things and leave them on the porch. I don't want to see you or her." The way Sarah couldn't even say Emma's name revealed the depth of her devastation and disgust. "Sarah, please," Marcus began, but she cut him off immediately. "I trusted you with everything," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as her anger overcame her grief. "I defended you when people said you were having a midlife crisis. I made excuses for your distance and your lies. And you were betraying me with a child I treated like family." The word child hung between them like an indictment, and Marcus realized that Sarah understood the full horror of what he had done. Not just the adultery, but the corruption of innocence, the abuse of trust, the destruction of everything they had built together. "I'll be there tomorrow at noon to get my things," Sarah said. "Make sure she's not there." "I can't. I won't be in the same room with her." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the phone and finally understanding that his marriage was truly over. When Marcus told Emma about Sarah's call and her demand that Emma not be present during the pickup, Emma's reaction was swift and violent. She threw Sarah's favorite coffee mug against the wall, screaming that she had more right to be in that house than some pathetic old woman who couldn't keep her husband satisfied. "You're not going to let her dictate terms to us," Emma declared, her blue eyes blazing with fury. "This is our house now. If she wants her things, she can face the reality of what her marriage really was." As Marcus looked at Emma's twisted expression of rage and entitlement, he finally saw her for what she truly was. Not the innocent victim of his midlife crisis, but a predator who had systematically destroyed his life for her own amusement. And tomorrow, when Sarah came home to collect the pieces of her shattered life, Emma would be there waiting to inflict even more cruelty on the woman she had already destroyed. That realization would drive Marcus to make the decision that transformed him from an unfaithful husband into something far more dangerous. The morning of March 15th, 2023, dawned gray and cold in sharp contrast to the warm spring weather that had preceded it, as if the very atmosphere reflected the darkness that was about to engulf 47 Willowbrook Drive. Marcus Thompson stood at his bedroom window, watching the street where he had lived peacefully for 15 years. Knowing that in a few hours everything would change forever. Sarah was scheduled to arrive at noon to collect her belongings, and despite Marcus's repeated demands that Emma make herself scarce, she had refused to leave the house. Instead, she had spent the morning arranging Sarah's packed boxes in the living room like trophies, occasionally holding up items of clothing or jewelry, with cruel commentary about Sarah's pathetic taste and desperate attempts to look younger. "Look at this," Emma said, pulling Sarah's wedding dress from a garment bag and holding it against herself in front of the hallway mirror. "Can you imagine being so delusional that you keep your wedding dress for 15 years? She probably thought you two would renew your vows someday." Emma's laughter was sharp and vicious, and Marcus felt something break inside him as he watched her mock the woman who had shown her nothing but kindness. "Take that off," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a tone that made Emma turn to look at him with surprise. "Put it back in a bag and stop touching her things." "Or what?" Emma challenged, spinning around so the wedding dress flared out around her legs. "You'll call your wife to come rescue her precious dress? Face reality, Marcus. Sarah is gone, and I'm here. This is my house now, and these are just reminders of a life that's over." At exactly 11:58 a.m., Sarah's blue Toyota Camry pulled into the driveway, and Marcus felt his heart clench as he saw his wife's familiar silhouette through the windshield. She sat in the car for several minutes, gathering courage for what she knew would be one of the most difficult moments of her life, unaware that Emma was watching from the upstairs window with an expression of predatory anticipation. When Sarah finally approached the front door, she looked fragile in a way that Marcus had never seen before. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup, and her clothes hung loose on her frame, as if she had lost weight during her 5-day absence. The sight of his wife's obvious suffering, combined with Emma's cruel excitement about inflicting more pain, triggered something primal and violent in Marcus's psychology. Sarah knocked hesitantly on the door of her own home, and when Marcus opened it, the look of devastation in her eyes was almost unbearable. "I just want my things," she said softly, not meeting his gaze. "I'll be quick." But as Sarah stepped into the hallway, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, still wearing Sarah's wedding dress, and smiling with malicious satisfaction. "Hello, Auntie Sarah," she said sweetly. "I hope you don't mind that I tried on your dress. Marcus says I look much better in it than you ever did." The cruelty was so calculated and unnecessary that Sarah actually staggered backward, as if she had been physically struck. Marcus watched his wife's face crumple with fresh pain, and something inside him snapped completely. All the months of manipulation, lies, and psychological torture that Emma had inflicted on both of them crystallized into a moment of perfect, murderous clarity. "Emma, get out," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "Take off that dress and get out of my house right now." "Your house?" Emma laughed, descending the stairs with theatrical grace. "This is our house, remember? Sarah doesn't live here anymore. She's just a visitor picking up her old life." She reached the bottom of the stairs and moved towards Sarah, who was standing frozen in the doorway. "You should have fought harder for him," Emma said directly to Sarah, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But I guess when you're old and boring, you just accept that younger, prettier women are going to take what you can't keep." Sarah turned and ran back to her car, leaving her belongings behind rather than endure another second of Emma's cruelty. Marcus watched through the window as his wife sat in her car, sobbing with her head in her hands, destroyed by the final confirmation that the girl she had treated like family viewed her as nothing more than an obstacle to be eliminated. When Marcus turned back to Emma, she was posing in front of the hallway mirror, admiring herself in Sarah's wedding dress with obvious pleasure. "Well, that went better than I expected," she said cheerfully. "She didn't even try to fight for you. I almost feel sorry for her." The words that came next would be replayed endlessly during Marcus's trial. "You destroyed everything good in my life." But Emma only laughed, spinning around in the wedding dress one more time. "I gave you something better," she replied. "I gave you excitement, passion, a future with someone who actually wants you. Sarah was holding you back from the life you really wanted." Marcus moved toward the kitchen, his hands shaking with rage, and Emma followed, still talking about their future together and how much better their life would be without Sarah's negative energy. She was reaching into the refrigerator for a bottle of wine, apparently planning to celebrate Sarah's humiliation, when Marcus picked up the heavy marble rolling pin that Sarah had received as a wedding gift 15 years earlier. The first blow caught Emma completely by surprise, sending her crashing into the refrigerator with a scream that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. But the rage that had been building for months couldn't be stopped with a single act of violence, and by the time Marcus regained control of himself, Emma Carter was lying motionless on the kitchen floor, still wearing Sarah's wedding dress, now stained with blood. Marcus called 911 at 12:47 p.m., his voice eerily calm as he reported that there had been an accident at 47 Willowbrook Drive. When police arrived, they found him sitting at his kitchen table, staring at Emma's body with an expression of complete emptiness. He offered no resistance when they placed him under arrest, and his only request was that someone call Sarah to tell her that Emma would never hurt her again. The trial began 6 months later, with prosecutors arguing that Marcus had committed premeditated murder in a fit of possessive rage. His defense team painted a picture of a man driven to temporary insanity by months of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse. Sarah, who had filed for divorce immediately after Emma's murder, testified that while she could never forgive Marcus's betrayal, she believed Emma had been a predator who had systematically destroyed their marriage for her own twisted satisfaction. Marcus Thompson was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Sarah Thompson moved across the country to start a new life, far from the memories of Willowbrook Drive. The Carter family left the neighborhood immediately after Emma's death, unable to bear the whispers and stares of neighbors who had witnessed their daughter's manipulation and cruelty. Today, 47 Willowbrook Drive sits empty, a for sale sign in the front yard marking the end of what had once been considered the neighborhood's perfect marriage. The case serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest dangers often come not from strangers, but from the people we invite into our homes and hearts, and that sometimes the line between victim and predator is far thinner than anyone wants to believe.